Welcome back, book buddies! Today we are going to carry on reading a book from the Mr. Men, Little Miss Advent Calendar. Let's go!
Let's read Day 20. Mr. Silly and the Silly Secret. Day 20. Mr. Silly and the Silly Secret. Mr. Silly lives in a silly house. Quite the silliest looking house you have ever seen. Well, have you ever seen a sillier looking house? But then Mr. Silly is very silly, so it's hardly surprising that he lives in such a silly house. On this particular day, Mr. Silly decided to make the most of the good weather and go out for the day. He got to the bus stop, but he kept walking. Nothing strange about that, I hear you say. He was in the mood for a walk. But no, not at all. Mr. Silly had decided to wait for the bus a little further along by a lamppost. But do you know what happens when you wait for a bus by a lamppost? That's right, the bus doesn't stop. How silly of Mr. Silly. If you want to take the bus, called the bus driver, you must wait at the bus stop like everyone else. But Mr. Silly didn't want to be like everyone else. He continued with his walk. He had an idea. A few days later, little Miss Helpful was passing Mr. Silly's house when she heard strange noises coming from inside his shed. "Good morning, Mr. Silly," she called. "Can I help you?" "If you want to," replied Mr. Silly. Poor little Miss Helpful. She came out of the shed covered in sticky black oil. "Yuck!" she cried. What could Mr. Silly be up to in his shed? It was a mystery. The next day Mr. Silly was so busy in his shed that he didn't hear Mr. Nosy coming along. Mr. Nosy was always poking his nose into other people's business, so he couldn't resist taking a peek into Mr. Silly's shed. Bang! Oh! Mr. Nosy's nose got shut in the door. "I'm sorry," said Mr. Silly. "Let me make it up to you. I'll show you my secret." Would you like to know what Mr. Silly's secret was? Mr. Silly had made himself a car, but not at all like anyone else's car. It was extremely tall, bath-shaped car. Mr. Silly could see for miles around. What a silly car. "A car that you can take a bath in," laughed Mr. Funny. How funny. From high up in his car, Mr. Silly could always find a parking space, and the car could go up and down to let Mr. Silly in and out. One day Mr. Silly was shopping. Snow began to fall. Soon everything was covered in a thick blanket of crisp white snow. All the cars were covered and couldn't be moved, all except Mr. Silly's. Thanks to his tall car, Mr. Silly was the only person who was able to drive away. On the way, he met his friends waiting for the bus. "Brr, let me give you a lift," called Mr. Silly. "Hooray for Mr. Silly!" cried all his friends. "So much more fun than the bus," laughed Mr. Funny. The next day all the newspapers told the story of Mr. Silly's amazing invention. Now everyone wanted a car like Mr. Silly's. "I think," said Mr. Silly to himself, "that I'll build a jellycopter next." What? Or something even sillier. What do you think that could be? Oh, I don't know. What's sillier than a jellycopter? The end. Thank you very much for joining me again today. Do come back so we can read more books together. Please like and subscribe. Bye.